You know the exact moment an open plan office goes silent enough to hear a pin drop. It happens when the new vice president looks you in the eye, extends a hand, and demands, "Give me your laptop, right now." There was no ticket and no paper trail. Just his smile implies his word is law. I complied, but not in the way he expected. That single chain of custody form turned his executive chair into the bench. My name is Hazel Mercer. I have been a senior operations analyst at Red Haven Compliance Partners for 7 years, and before that, I spent 6 years in audit defense for a firm that no longer exists because they shredded documents they should have kept. I learned early in my career that in the corporate world, the truth does not matter nearly as much as the record of the truth. People lie, memories fade, handshakes are forgotten, but a time-stamped log entry is forever. The conference room on the 42nd floor was cold. It was always cold. A deliberate architectural choice designed to keep meetings short and alertness high. Through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the gray skyline of the city looked like a circuit board. We were 40 minutes into the onboarding session for our new vice president, Grant Halbrook. Grant was the kind of man who wore his authority like cologne. He had been hired to tighten the ship, increase billable hours, and trim the fat. He had walked into the room with a smile that showed too many teeth and eyes that did not smile at all. He did not sit at the head of the table. He stood, he prowled. He moved behind our chairs while we worked, leaning over shoulders, invading personal space just enough to make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. Efficiency is not just about speed, Grant was saying. His voice was smooth, polished, and loud enough to carry without effort. It is about transparency. I need to know what you are working on, how you are working on it, and where the bottlenecks are. No more silos. No more hidden folders. I kept my eyes on my screen. I was taking minutes, but I was also monitoring the live deployment status for our largest client, a logistics conglomerate represented in the room by a man named Mr. Sterling. Sterling sat across from me, looking bored and slightly annoyed that his implementation timeline was being eaten up by this internal power display. Grant stopped pacing. I could feel his presence looming behind my ergonomic chair. The room went quiet. The hum of the projector fan seemed to get louder. "Hazel, is it?" Grant asked. I stopped typing. I swiveled my chair slightly to face him, keeping my expression neutral. "Yes, Grant, Hazel Mercer." He pointed a manicured finger at my laptop. It was a high-performance machine, issued specifically for handling large datasets and sensitive personal identifiable information. "That machine," he said, "it contains the current project files, the raw data for the implementation we are discussing." "It does." I confirmed. "I need to see it, right now." He extended his hand, palm open, fingers waiting. It was a test. I knew it instantly. It was a dominance display performed in front of the entire operations team and, more critically, in front of the client. He wanted to show that he could snap his fingers and we would jump. He wanted to show that he owned the data, the process, and us. The room was so silent I could hear the person next to me swallow. Marissa Klein, my director and direct supervisor, looked down at her notepad, refusing to make eye contact. She knew the policy. She also knew that Grant outranked her. She was choosing survival. I did not look down. I looked at Grant. "I can forward the specific files you need for review," I said, my voice calm and leveled. "Or, if you require full administrative access to the project directory, I can submit a priority ticket to IT right now to have your permissions updated. It usually takes about 15 minutes. Grant's smile tightened at the corners. He dropped his hand slightly, then thrust it out again, closer to my face. "No," he said. The smooth veneer cracked just a little, revealing the steel underneath. "I do not want a ticket. I do not want an email. I want the laptop. Give it to me. I am the vice president." The air left the room. This was it. The line in the sand. Mr. Sterling, the client, shifted in his seat. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. He was not looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with assessment. He was wondering if the person handling his company's sensitive employee data was the type of person who folded under pressure, or the type of person who followed the rules. If I gave Grant the laptop, I was handing over an unencrypted session with active admin credentials to a user who had not been vetted by the security team for this specific hardware. It was a violation of 3 separate clauses in our employee handbook and, more importantly, a direct violation of the contract we had signed with Mr. Sterling's company. Grant thought he was asserting authority. I knew he was walking into a minefield. I placed both hands flat on the closed lid of my laptop. "Grant," I said, "I cannot do that." "Excuse me?" He blinked. He clearly had not heard the word no very often since his promotion. I cannot hand over this physical device without following protocol. I said, I am the protocol, he snapped. I reached down into my leather portfolio case which sat on the floor beside my chair. I had prepared for this, not for Grant specifically, but for men like him. In my 12 years of operations, I had learned that, eventually, someone always tries to bypass the system. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was crisp, white, and already stapled. I slid it across the mahogany table toward him. It came to rest right in front of his expensive tie. He looked down at it, confused. What is this? He demanded. It is a chain of custody transfer form. I said. My voice did not shake. It is required for the physical handover of any hardware containing Level 4 client data. It requires the serial number of the machine, the time of transfer, the reason for the transfer, and the signatures of both the relinquishing party and the receiving party. It also requires a witness. Grant laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh that was meant to be dismissive. He looked around the room, inviting everyone else to join in on the joke. Nobody laughed. You are making a scene. Hazel, he said, shaking his head. You are overreacting. It is just a laptop. We are on the same team. No, I said. I am not making a scene. I am being correct. He stared at me. The silence stretched out, thin and brittle. He was furious. I could see the vein in his temple pulsing. He had tried to big dog me in front of the client, and I had hit him with paperwork. Just give me the computer, he hissed, his voice dropping to a low growl. Do not make this difficult. I did not answer him with words. Not yet. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my personal phone. I unlocked it and opened the camera application. I held the phone up, framing the shot perfectly. I captured my closed laptop on the table, the chain of custody form lying ignored in front of it, and Grant Halbrook standing over me with his hand extended in a demand gesture. Click! The shutter sound was artificially loud in the quiet room. Grant recoiled, as if I had slapped him. What do you think you are doing? I tapped the screen, opening the photo to check the metadata. I am documenting the timestamp, I said. Then, without breaking eye contact, I switched to the keypad. I typed in 4 digits. It was the internal emergency line for IT security. I pressed the speakerphone icon and set the phone down on the table next to the laptop. The ringback tone purred through the room. 1 ring, 2 rings, security operations. This is Miller, a voice answered. Crisp and alert. Miller, this is Hazel Mercer, senior operations analyst, I said, projecting my voice clearly so the microphone would catch it, and so the client would hear every syllable. I have a security incident in progress in conference room B. I have a senior executive demanding the physical surrender of a device containing active client data without a support ticket and refusing to sign a chain of custody form. I am initiating a lockdown protocol on this machine effective immediately. Grant froze. His hand was still half extended, but now his fingers were curling into a fist. He looked at the phone, then at me, and finally, for the first time, he looked at the client. Mr. Sterling was leaning forward, watching with rapt attention. I waited for Grant to speak. I waited for him to scream, but the only sound in the room was the breathing of 12 people who realized that the game had just changed. The new VP had wanted to show us how things worked. I had just shown him how things actually worked. The voice of Miller from security operations filled the room, amplified by the speakerphone of my mobile device. It was not a warm voice. It was the flat metallic tone of a man who spent his days staring at firewall logs and badge access reports. State the nature of the data on the device. Hazel, Miller said. I looked at Grant Halbrook. His face had gone from a flush of anger to a controlled mask of indifference, but his eyes were darting around the room, gauging the reaction of the audience. He had expected me to fold. He had expected a senior analyst to crumble before a vice president. He had not expected me to weaponize the rulebook. The laptop contains the active master file for the Sterling Logistics implementation, I said, speaking clearly for the benefit of the recording line. It includes unmasked employee social security numbers, bank routing information for the payroll integration, and the proprietary algorithm for their supply chain routing. Under the Data Classification Policy, Section 4, Paragraph 2. This constitutes Level 4 critical data. I turned my gaze to Mr. Sterling. The client was no longer looking at his watch. He was leaning forward, his elbows on the mahogany table, watching the theater of compliance play out. He knew exactly what Level 4 meant. It meant that if that laptop went missing or was accessed by an unauthorized user, His company would face fines in the millions of dollars. Therefore, I continued, my voice steady, any transfer of custody requires a documented ticket, a validation of the recipient's security clearance for this specific project, and a witness to the physical handover. Grant Halbrook does not have a ticket. He has not been cleared for the Sterling Project Group, and he just attempted to commandeer the device without documentation. Grant let out a short, dismissive breath. He adjusted his cufflinks, trying to regain the high ground by acting as if I were a hysterical bureaucrat wasting everyone's time. This is ridiculous, Grant said, his voice dropping to a register that was meant to be soothing but sounded condescending. I am the vice president of this division. I do not need a ticket to supervise my own department. I will sign a waiver. I will sign whatever piece of paper you want. Just hand me the computer so we can proceed with the meeting. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a silver pen, holding it out as if his signature were a magical talisman that could dissolve federal privacy laws. I did not move. I did not take the pen. A signature on a piece of scrap paper is legally meaningless without the initiated chain of custody log in the system. I said, if I hand you this machine based on a verbal promise and a signature that hasn't been notarized or logged, I am personally liable for the breach. I am not willing to lose my certification for your convenience. Grant opened his mouth to argue, but the voice from the phone cut him off like a guillotine. Hazel is correct, Miller said. The audio quality was sharp enough that everyone heard the hard edge in his tone. Mr. Halbrook, you are an unverified user on that asset. Do not attempt to touch the device. Hazel, maintain physical control of the unit. Do not hand it over in a private setting. Do not leave the room. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. Before the call, it was a power struggle between a subordinate and a boss. Now, it was a security incident. Grant was no longer the hunter. He was the threat. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. It was a dry, authoritative sound. I appreciate the diligence, the client said, looking directly at me. My legal team is very particular about chain of custody. It is refreshing to see a vendor who actually takes it seriously, rather than just nodding during the compliance audit. He shot a look at Grant. It was a look that said, I am watching you. Grant saw the look. He realized he was losing the room. He was losing the client. He needed to pivot, and he needed to do it fast. He forced a smile that looked painful. Of course, Grant said, spreading his hands in a gesture of mock surrender. We all value security. I was simply testing the team's reaction time. A live drill, if you will. Nobody bought it. The air in the room was thick with the skepticism of 12 experienced corporate operatives who knew a backpedal when they saw one. Since we are being so formal, Grant said, his eyes locking onto mine with a cold intensity that contradicted his casual tone. Bring the laptop to my office after the meeting. We will handle the paperwork there. We can resolve this internally without boring Mr. Sterling with our administrative housekeeping. Internal resolution starts with the established process. I replied, I cannot bring the laptop to your office. SecOps has ordered me to remain here. Grant took a step closer. He lowered his voice, trying to keep the next words between just the two of us. But the room was so silent that his whisper carried like a shout. Does that machine contain the Delta folder, he asked? I froze. My fingers, which had been hovering over the trackpad, went still. The Delta folder. That name was not in the project scope. It was not in the onboarding documents. It was not on the shared drive. It was a hidden directory I had created locally on my machine 3 days ago to store a set of discrepancies I had found in the legacy data. I had not told a soul about it. Not Marissa, not the client, and certainly not the new VP who had been in the building for less than 4 hours. How did he know about Delta? If I answered yes, I admitted to having files outside the standard structure. If I answered no, I would be lying on the record. I looked at him. He was watching me closely, waiting for the flicker of recognition. He thought he had trapped me. He thought that by invoking a secret, he could force me into a conspiracy. I did not answer. Instead, I reached for the notepad lying next to the phone. I picked up my pen. In clear block letters, I wrote 10:42 a.m. Grant Halbrook inquired about the existence of the Delta directory. Origin of his knowledge regarding this directory is unknown. I turned the notepad so the camera on my phone, which was still recording the session, could clearly see what I had written. Grant's eyes narrowed. He saw what I wrote. He saw that I was not playing his game. I was documenting it. Miller, I said to the phone, the requested party is asking specific questions about directory structures that are not public knowledge. How do you wish to proceed? Lock it down. Miller said instantly, We are escalating this to a code yellow. Hazel, do you have a tamper-evident bag in your kit? I do, I said. Bag it, seal it, read the serial number of the seal into the record. Do not give that computer to anyone but a uniformed security officer. I bent down and opened the bottom compartment of my portfolio. I pulled out a heavy-duty plastic bag with a red adhesive strip across the top. It was the kind of bag used for evidence collection. The crinkle of the plastic was deafening in the quiet room. I picked up the laptop. I slid it into the bag. Grant watched, helpless. To stop me now would be to physically assault an employee in front of a client while security was on the line. He was checkmated by the very bureaucracy he had claimed to represent. I pulled the red strip. I pressed the seal down. The permanent adhesive bonded instantly. Sealing device, I said, my voice monotonous and professional. Tamper evidence seal number Alpha Zulu 9442. Time is 10:43 a.m. I wrote the number on the chain of custody form. The sound of the seal taking hold was final. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. Around the table, the other analysts were exchanging glances. They were terrified. Yes, but there was something else in their eyes. Respect. Maybe even a little awe. They were watching someone stand in front of a tank and stop it with a piece of paper. Grant stood there, his hands balling into fists at his sides. He had wanted my laptop. Now, it was sitting in a sealed evidence bag in the center of the conference table. Effectively untouchable. This meeting is adjourned, Grant said, his voice tight. He turned on his heel and walked out of the glass room without looking back at Mr. Sterling. I sat there, my hand resting on the plastic bag. I knew this was far from over. I knew that by the time I got back to my desk, the war would have begun. But for now, the data was safe, and I had the feeling that the Delta folder was about to become the most important thing in the company. The hallway outside Conference Room B was lined with abstract art that looked like spilled coffee. A desperate attempt by the interior designers to inject soul into a soulless environment. I had walked this corridor 1,000 times, but today the carpet felt softer, like quicksand. The heavy glass door clicked shut behind me, severing the connection to the witnesses inside. I was halfway to the elevator bank when I heard the footsteps. They were heavy, rhythmic, and closing fast. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The scent of expensive sandalwood and aggression hit me before he did. Grant Halbrook stepped in front of me, cutting off my path. He was tall enough that he had to look down at me, and he used every inch of that height to create a wall of expensive suit fabric. We were alone. The ambient hum of the air conditioning was the only sound in the corridor. You enjoy the theater, do you not? Grant asked. His voice was low, stripped of the charm he performed for clients. It was the voice of a man who was used to breaking things until they fit into the boxes he built. I held the tamper-evident bag against my chest like a shield. I am not sure what you mean. I said. I kept my tone flat. Emotion is the first thing they look for. If you get angry, you are unstable. If you get scared, you are guilty. You humiliated me in there, Grant said. He took a half step closer. It was a subtle intimidation tactic, invading my personal space just enough to be uncomfortable, but not enough to be caught on a security camera as a physical threat. You made me look incompetent in front of Sterling. That account is worth 15% of our quarterly projection. I did not make you look incompetent. Grant, I replied, meeting his eyes, I kept you from violating a federal data privacy statute. I was protecting the company, and I was protecting you. He laughed, but it was a dry, hollow sound. Protecting me. Do not insult my intelligence. That performance with the phone, the speakerphone, that was not protection. That was a declaration of war. You decided that following a bureaucratic checklist was more important than supporting your leadership. Leadership is knowing the rules. I said, not breaking them. His face hardened. The mask slipped completely. Let us be clear about something. Hazel, you think you are untouchable because you know the handbook. But books do not run companies. People do. And as of 5 minutes ago, I run this department. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper that sounded like sandpaper on stone. Effective immediately. Your reporting line has changed. You no longer report to Marissa. You report directly to me. All your projects, all your timesheets, and every single email you send goes through my inbox for approval. Do you understand? My stomach tightened. He was flanking me. By removing Marissa from the chain, he was isolating me. He was removing my buffer. If I reported to him, he could bury my work, reject my hours, and write my performance reviews. He was building a cage. I understand. I said, I will wait for the official notification from HR regarding the organizational chart update. He smiled then, and it was the coldest thing I had seen all day. "You do that," he said. He stepped aside, dismissing me. I walked past him, keeping my spine straight, refusing to hurry. I could feel his eyes on my back until I turned the corner. I had barely made it to the break room alcove when a hand grabbed my elbow. It was Marissa Klein. Her face was pale, and her lipstick looked too bright against her washed-out skin. She pulled me into the small supply closet where we kept the printer toner and extra paper reams. She closed the door and leaned against it. Exhaling a breath she seemed to have been holding for an hour. "Hazel," she whispered, "what have you done?" I followed protocol. "Marissa," I said, "you saw him. He was going to take the machine. You kicked the hornet nest," she said, her voice shaking. "Grant is not just a new hire. I heard things from his time at his last firm. He does not play fair. He destroys people who get in his way. He will not fire you. Hazel, that is too messy. He will make you quit. He will make your life so miserable that you will beg to leave. He just told me I report to him now." I said. Marissa closed her eyes. I knew it. He sent the email while we were walking out of the room. He told the CEO he needs to take a hands-on approach with the problem assets. "You are the problem asset. Hazel, I am not the problem." I said, "I am the only one following the law." Marissa looked at me with a mixture of pity and fear. She was a good director, but she had a mortgage and 2 kids in private school. She could not afford to be brave. "Watch your back," she said. "Please, I cannot help you on this one. If I step in, he will cut me too." I nodded. I understood. In corporate warfare, there are no allies, only co-belligerents. I left the closet and walked to my desk. The open plan office was buzzing with low-level chatter. But as soon as I sat down, the noise seemed to dip. People were looking at me. They looked away quickly when I caught their eyes. The story had already traveled. The crazy analyst who called security on the new VP. I sat at my desk. My primary laptop was in the bag. So I logged into the backup terminal I kept for testing. It was an older machine, slower, but it had network access. I typed in my credentials. The welcome screen spun for a long time. Then, a message popped up. "Access denied. You do not have permission to access the Z Drive project repository." I tried my calendar. Sync error. Exchange server unavailable. I tried to open the shared team workspace where we collaborated on the Sterling account. User not authorized. I sat back. It was starting. The soft freeze. He was cutting my digital throat. Without access to the project files, I could not work. If I could not work, I was unproductive. If I was unproductive, he had grounds for a performance improvement plan. It was elegant, efficient, and brutal. My email client pinged. One message had made it through. It was an automated notification from the HR ticketing system. My heart hammered against my ribs as I opened it. Subject Incident Report, 88291. Unlawful retention of company property. I read the body of the text. It was a notification that a formal complaint had been filed against me. The complainant was Grant Halbrook. The summary stated that I had refused a direct executive order to return company hardware and was demonstrating hostile behavior indicative of a potential insider threat. He had CC'd the head of human resources and the chief legal officer, but he had blind copied the ticket system so it would generate this alert to me. He wanted me to see it. He wanted me to panic. He was accusing me of stealing the laptop I had just sealed in an evidence bag. It was gaslighting on an industrial scale. I stared at the screen. Most people would have started crying. Most people would have run to the bathroom or called their spouse. I did not cry. I felt a cold clarity settle over me. Grant had made a mistake. He assumed I was playing defense. I opened a local folder on the backup terminal. It was a folder named Archive, buried 3 levels deep in a system directory. I had been backing up my logs here for years. I opened the file labeled Compliance Log Current, TXT. There it was. Every interaction, every timestamp. 10:42 a.m. Grant Halbrook. Demands device without ticket. 10:43 a.m. Grant Halbrook attempts to bypass SecOps protocol. 10:45 a.m. Grant Halbrook threatens retaliation in hallway. I had the photo of the chain of custody form. I had the recording of the call to Miller. And now, I had the screenshot of my access being revoked less than 15 minutes after I protected client data. Grant wanted a paper trail. I was going to give him a library. I hit reply all to the HR ticket notification. I added the email addresses for the entire security operations team, the head of legal, and the external ethics hotline compliance box. I began to type. To whom it may concern, regarding Incident 88291, I am formally contesting the characterization of events. The device in question, Asset Tag 4492, was secured under the direct instruction of Security Operations Officer Miller at 10:43 this morning following an attempted unauthorized access by Vice President Grant Halbrook. I am currently in possession of the chain of custody seal, number Alpha Zulu 9442. The device is sealed and awaiting transfer to the secure vault. Furthermore, as of 11:15 this morning, my access to all project folders and calendar functions has been revoked without notice. I interpret this as immediate retaliation for my refusal to violate the Data Privacy Act. I am hereby requesting the immediate opening of a formal chain of custody investigation regarding this device. I require written confirmation of the identity of the person who requested my access be revoked. I also require a preservation order for all security camera footage from the 42nd floor hallway between the hours of 10:45 and 10:50 this morning. I am not holding company property. I am holding evidence. I read it over once. It was not polite. It was not deferential. It was a torpedo. I moved the mouse to the send button. My finger hovered for a fraction of a second. I knew that once I clicked this, there was no going back. I was declaring open war on a man who made 5 times my salary. I clicked send. The message vanished from my outbox. I leaned back in my chair and waited. The silence in the office felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. Grant thought he had buried me. He was about to find out that he had just tried to bury a landmine. I did not have to wait long. The summons arrived 17 minutes after I sent my email. It was a calendar invitation for a personnel alignment sync in the HR conference suite on the 35th floor. The vague corporate title did not fool anyone. This was an interrogation. The room was smaller than the one upstairs, windowless and painted a calming shade of beige that felt suffocating. Dana Holt from Human Resources sat at the head of the table. I had dealt with Dana before. She was efficient, protective of the company shield, and generally allergic to drama. Today, she looked like she had swallowed a lemon. Next to her sat Arthur Vance, a junior associate from legal. He was young, eager, and typing furiously on his laptop. He did not look up when I entered. "Sit down, Hazel," Dana said. She did not offer me water. I sat. I placed my backup laptop on the table but did not open it. I folded my hands in my lap. "We received your email," Dana started. Her tone clipped. "And the ticket from Mr. Halbrook. We are trying to understand why a simple request for equipment has escalated into a cross-departmental incident involving security operations and the ethics hotline. This looks like a significant overreaction. Hazel, you are creating noise." "I did not create the noise, Dana," I replied calmly. "I created a record. There is a difference." "Mr. Halbrook states that you refused a direct instruction to hand over company property," Arthur said, finally looking up from his screen. "He claims insubordination." "I refused a request to violate the data handling policy," I corrected him. "The device contains Level 4 client data. The requester had no ticket, no clearance for the project, and refused to sign the chain of custody. If I had handed it over, I would be in breach of the Sterling contract. Is Redhaven prepared to explain a breach of contract to our largest client because a VP did not want to wait for a ticket?" Arthur paused. He looked at Dana. "She has a point on the policy side." "Policy is there for guidance," Dana said, waving her hand dismissively. "But we also expect flexibility and respect for leadership. Making a scene in front of a client was unnecessary. Protecting the client's data in front of the client is the definition of my job," I said. The door opened. Grant Halbrook walked in. He had removed his jacket. His tie was loosened slightly, a calculated look of hard-working executive dealing with petty distractions. He carried a coffee cup and an air of supreme confidence. "Sorry I'm late," Grant said, pulling out the chair opposite me. "I was on the phone with Mr. Sterling, smoothing over the awkwardness from this morning." He smiled at Dana. "Dana, good to see you. Arthur, I hope we can wrap this up quickly. I have a department to run, even if some of my staff seem intent on preventing that." "We were just discussing the laptop handover," Dana said. "Right," Grant sighed. He looked at me with a disappointed father expression. "Look, I admit I may have been a bit direct. I am new. I wanted to do a spot check on the project files. I wanted to see the raw data myself to ensure we are on track. I did not realize Hazel would take it as a personal affront." "It was not personal," I said. "It was procedural. It was obstruction," Grant countered, his voice hardening slightly. "I asked for the computer. You called the police. Essentially, I called security operations," I said. As required by the handbook, when an unauthorized user attempts to commandeer a secure asset, I am the vice president. Grant slammed his hand on the table. It was sudden, loud, and designed to make me flinch. I did not flinch. I am not an unauthorized user. I am your boss. Your title is VP, I said. Your system permissions for the Sterling project are null. Until it grants you access, you are, by definition, an unauthorized user on that specific machine. I opened my backup laptop. I connected it to the room's display screen with a cable I had brought with me. Let us look at the timeline, I said. The screen flickered to life. I projected the SecOps ticket log. 10:43 a.m., I read. Ticket number 44921. Security Officer Miller logs the incident. Note the flag. Requester refused chain of custody. Requester attempted to bypass protocol. Device ordered, sealed. I pointed to the screen. This is not my opinion. Grant, this is the official security log. You did not just ask for the laptop. You refused to sign for it. Grant waved his hand at the screen. Miller is an overzealous, glorified guard. I told him I would sign later. And that is why I could not give it to you, I said. Later does not exist in compliance. Grant turned to Dana. See, this is what I am dealing with. Rigidity, inability to adapt. She is blocking my ability to lead. I cannot manage a team that treats me like a criminal. Arthur, the lawyer, cleared his throat. He had been reading through the printed copy of my email I had sent earlier. He looked at the paper, then at Grant. Mr. Halbrook, Arthur said. His voice was different now, less deferential, more lawyerly. In Hazel's report, she mentions that you specifically asked about a folder named Delta. The room went quiet. Grant froze. It was subtle, just a momentary cessation of movement. But I saw it. His coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. I might have mentioned it, Grant said, putting the cup down. I heard there were some file structure issues. Who told you about the Delta folder? Arthur asked. I do not recall, Grant said quickly. Maybe one of the other analysts. The Delta folder resides on my local drive, I said, looking at Grant. It is not on the network. It is not on the shared drive. No other analyst has access to it. It was created 72 hours ago. The only way you could know that name is if you had prior knowledge of the data discrepancies I was investigating, or if you had accessed my machine remotely before today. Grant's eyes snapped to mine. There was genuine venom in them now. I did not access your machine, he spat. I am speculating. I heard the term used in passing. You are paranoid. Arthur was not looking at Grant anymore. He was looking at his notes. The issue, Arthur said slowly, is that if you were looking for a specific, non-shared folder, that implies a targeted search, not a general spot check, and if that folder contains sensitive internal reviews. Arthur trailed off. He was connecting the dots. If Grant knew about Delta, he knew about the discrepancies I was fixing. Discrepancies that, if exposed incorrectly, could look like fraud, rather than just data cleaning. Dana Holt shifted in her chair. She looked from Grant to me, and for the first time, I saw the corporate machinery in her brain switch tracks. She had come here to discipline a rogue employee. Now she realized she might be sitting across from a liability. What is in the Delta folder? Hazel, Dana asked. Raw data comparisons. I said. Proof that the timeline we sold the client does not match the operational reality. I was building a remediation plan to fix it before the go-live date. If that folder is deleted, we lose the baseline. We would be flying blind. Dana looked at Grant. Is that why you wanted the laptop to see the timeline? I wanted to manage the risk, Grant shouted. He stood up. This is absurd. I am being interrogated because I tried to do my job. Hazel is insubordinate. She is holding data hostage. I want her off the project. I am not holding anything, I said. The laptop is with security. Arthur raised a hand. Okay, stop. Both of you. He looked at Grant. Mr. Halbrook, given the questions around the Delta folder and the involvement of the security team, we cannot just hand the device over to you. That would break the chain of evidence if there is indeed a compliance investigation open. Investigation, Grant laughed incredulously. There is no investigation. It is a misunderstanding. Hazel formally requested one, Arthur said, and she CC'd the ethics line. Once that bell is rung, we have to follow the process. Grant glared at me. If looks could fire people, I would have been escorted out of the building right then. Fine, Grant said. Let the lawyers play with the paperwork, but in the meantime, I want all client communication to go through me. Hazel is not to speak to Sterling until this is resolved. Actually, Arthur said, I think it is best if we channel all communication through the formal project management office for now, until we clarify the status of the data. Arthur turned to me. Hazel, the device stays with security. Do not attempt to retrieve it. SecOps will hold it as a sealed exhibit. Understood, I said. And Grant, Arthur continued, you are not to attempt to access that device or its backup images until legal clears it. Grant picked up his jacket. He looked like he wanted to throw the chair through the wall. You are making a mistake, Grant said to Arthur. Then he looked at me. You think you won a round, Hazel, but you just painted a target on your back. You better be perfect from now on, because I will be watching every keystroke. He stormed out of the room. The door slammed shut, vibrating the thin walls. Dana let out a long sigh. She looked at me, her expression tired. You are playing a dangerous game, Hazel, she said. I am not playing. Dana, I said, closing my laptop. I am working. I stood up and left the room. My hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I had forced them to acknowledge the record. Grant had tried to bully his way through, and the system had bucked him off. But as I walked back to the elevator, I knew Grant was right about one thing. He would be watching, and he would not make the mistake of asking nicely next time. The next 3 days were a masterclass in corporate erasure. In the wild, animals isolate the sick or the weak to protect the herd. In an office, they do it to protect their careers. I had become the sick animal. It started with my calendar. When I logged in on Tuesday morning, the blocks of blue meetings that usually structured my day had vanished. The daily stand-up with the operations team canceled for me. The weekly strategy sync with the Sterling account managers declined on my behalf by an administrative assistant I had never met. The project review board removed. I sat in my cubicle, surrounded by the hum of productivity, and I had never felt more conspicuous. The silence around my desk was a physical weight. People I had worked with for 5 years, people whose children's birthdays I knew, walked past my aisle with their eyes fixed on the floor or their phones. They treated me like I was radioactive. If they looked at me, they might catch whatever bad luck I had brought upon myself. I overheard a whisper near the water cooler, a snippet of conversation between 2 junior associates. One of them said that crossing the new vice president was professional suicide. The other one just laughed nervously and said he did not want to be in the blast radius. I did not blame them. They had mortgages and student loans. Heroism is expensive. Instead of meaningful work, my inbox began to fill with what we call busy work. At 10 o'clock, Grant forwarded me a request to reformat a 3-year-old archive of expense reports. He added a note. Please ensure font consistency and check for rounding errors. It was a task for an intern. For a senior operations analyst, it was an insult. It was designed to break my spirit. He wanted me to feel useless. He wanted me to get angry, storm into his office, and give him grounds to fire me for behavioral issues. I did not storm. I opened the spreadsheet. I checked every single font. I corrected the rounding errors. I logged the task in my daily activity tracker with the code Administrative Support, Executive Request. I saved the file, timestamped it, and emailed it back to him at noon with a polite note confirming completion. I was not going to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. I was going to be the most compliant, boring, and legally bulletproof employee in the building. Around 2 in the afternoon, Marissa Klein stopped by my desk. She did not sit down. She stood in the aisle, holding a stack of papers, looking like she was ready to bolt if Grant appeared. Hazel, she said quietly. I looked up. Marissa, do you need something? She sighed, shifting her weight. The dark circles under her eyes were new. You are making this hard on everyone. Hazel, the mood on the floor is terrible. Grant is tearing apart the team looking for leaks because of what happened in the conference room. I am doing my job. Marissa, I said, I am sitting here formatting old spreadsheets because that is what I was told to do. You know what I mean, she said, her voice dropping lower. Just go to him. Apologize. Tell him you were stressed. Tell him you want to be a team player. He just wants the ring kissed. If you do that, this goes away. We can get back to work. I looked at her. I liked Marissa. She was a survivor. But she was asking me to surrender. I cannot do that. I said, if I apologize, I admit fault. If I admit fault, I admit that following the data privacy law was a mistake. I will not put that on my record. Marissa shook her head. You are stubborn. You are going to lose. Hazel, he has the title. He has the ear of the CEO. You have a piece of paper and a sealed bag. I have the truth. I said, that does not pay the rent, she replied. She walked away. I watched her go, feeling a pang of loneliness that was sharper than I expected. I was holding the line, but I was holding it alone. At 3:30, the first crack in Grant's blockade appeared. It came from the outside. My email pinged. I expected another menial task or a reprimand from HR. Instead, I saw the domain name Sterling Logistics. It was a direct message from Mr. Sterling himself. Subject timeline discrepancies. Urgent. I opened it. My heart rate kicked up a notch. Hazel. The email read, I am reviewing the updated project roadmap sent over by Grant this morning. The delivery dates for the supply chain integration have been moved up by 6 weeks. This contradicts the risk assessment you presented last month. Grant assures me the data supports this acceleration, but I do not see the raw validation files. Who is currently managing the master data? I need a verify on this timeline immediately. I sat back. This was the trap. Grant had moved the timeline. He had promised the client a faster delivery to impress them, likely to secure his bonus or a contract extension. To do that, he had to ignore the risk flags, the flags that were in the Delta folder. The flags I had raised. If I answered Mr. Sterling and told him the timeline was impossible, Grant would fire me for unauthorized communication with a client and sabotaging a deal. If I ignored the email, I looked incompetent and complicit in the lie. If I lied and said the timeline was fine, I would be part of the fraud. Grant was counting on me to panic. He was counting on me to try to save the relationship with the client by spilling the beans, which would give him the ammunition to destroy me for insubordination. I took a breath. I turned to my second monitor where I kept the corporate policy handbook open. I found the section on litigation hold and communication protocols. I hit reply. I did not just reply to Mr. Sterling. In the carbon copy field, I added the generic email address for the project management office. Then, deliberately, I added the email address for Red Haven's general counsel and the external legal compliance inbox. I typed, Dear Mr. Sterling, thank you for your inquiry. Per the instruction of Vice President Grant Halbrook and the current directive from Red Haven Legal regarding ongoing internal data reviews, I am no longer authorized to access the master data files or comment on project timelines. All questions regarding data validation and timeline feasibility must be directed to Mr. Halbrook or the legal department. Copied here. I have logged your request for the record. Regards, Hazel Mercer. It was the perfect bureaucratic grenade. I had not said Grant was lying. I had not said the timeline was wrong. I had simply stated that I was forbidden from telling the truth. And I had told the company lawyers that the client was asking questions about data I was not allowed to see. To a smart man like Mr. Sterling, I am not allowed to answer is the loudest answer possible. It screams that something is being hidden. I pressed send. 10 minutes later, the door to Grant's office slammed open. I could see him across the floor. He stood in the doorway, scanning the room until his eyes locked on mine. He was red in the face. He held his phone in his hand like he wanted to crush it. He could not come over and scream at me, not after I had copied legal. If he yelled at me now, it would look like retaliation for following his own orders. He pointed a finger at me, held it for a second, and then went back inside his office. He slammed the door so hard the glass walls vibrated. He knew I had just signaled the client that the books were cooked, and I had done it without breaking a single rule. The rest of the afternoon passed in a tense haze. I left at 5:30 exactly. I packed my bag, leaving the desk perfectly tidy. As I walked to the elevator, I felt the vibration of my personal phone in my pocket. I stepped into the elevator. It was empty. I pulled out my phone. It was an internal extension, but the caller ID was blocked. I answered, Hello? There was a pause. I could hear the hum of a server room in the background, the distinctive white noise of high-powered cooling fans. Hazel. The voice was whispered, distorted, likely someone holding a hand over the microphone. Speaking. I said, This is a friend in IT. The voice said, I cannot stay on the line. I just wanted you to know what I asked. The machine you tagged, the one in the tamper-evident bag. Yes, someone just tried to mount a disk image of it from the administrative backend. They tried to bypass the physical seal by going through the network shadow copy. Did they get in? I asked, my grip tightening on the phone. No, the voice said. The lockdown you requested held. But the credentials used for the attempt were high level. Very high level. And Hazel. Yes. The attempt came from a terminal inside the building, but the user masked their IP. Whoever it is, they are desperate. They are not waiting for legal anymore. They are trying to break the digital seal. The line went dead. I stared at the phone. The elevator doors opened to the lobby. spilling me out into the marble atrium. Grant was not just angry, he was scared. He needed what was in that laptop, and he needed it before the client audit started. He had tried to bully me. He had tried to isolate me. Now, he was trying to break into the evidence. I walked out into the cool evening air. The city was bustling with people going home to their families, to their dinners, to their normal lives. I walked toward the subway, knowing that tomorrow, the soft freeze would end. The heat was about to turn up. The next morning, I did not go to my cubicle on the 42nd floor. Instead, I took the service elevator down to the second sub-basement. This was the domain of the physical infrastructure, where the air conditioning was kept at a constant 64 degrees, and the hum of the server racks was loud enough to vibrate your teeth. I had arranged to meet the voice from the phone. His name was Marcus, a senior systems administrator I had worked with during the firewall migration 2 years ago. We met in the cage, a secure holding area for decommissioned hardware. It was the only place in the building without audio surveillance. Marcus looked tired. He was wearing a hoodie over his dress shirt, the universal uniform of IT staff who had pulled an all-nighter. He did not say hello. He simply turned his laptop screen toward me. "Look at this," Marcus said. I leaned in. On the screen was a log entry from the Central Identity Management System. "What am I looking at?" I asked. "You are looking at a break glass administrative request." Marcus explained. "In the event of a catastrophic system failure where the primary authentication servers go down, we have a set of emergency admin accounts. They are the nuclear option. They bypass all two-factor authentication and give the user God mode access to the entire network, including shadow copies of local drives." I scanned the log. The request had been flagged at 6:45 the previous evening. The justification code entered was Critical Business Continuity Event. "Who requested it?" I asked, though I already felt the answer in the pit of my stomach. Marcus highlighted the user ID, G. Halbrook exec. "Grant," I said. "He tried to mount the disk image of your laptop," Marcus said. "He did not need the physical machine, since your laptop backs up to the network every hour. He tried to access the latest backup image stored on the server. He wanted to mount it as a virtual drive, copy the contents, and likely scrub the original. But he failed," I said. "He failed because you put the machine in legal hold status with Miller yesterday," Marcus said. "When a machine is tagged for legal hold, even a break glass admin cannot mount the image without a countersign from the Chief Information Security Officer. The system blocked him. That is why he is panicked. He triggered a silent alarm in the Security Operations Center. That is how I saw it." I stood up straight, my mind racing. This was no longer about micromanagement or a new VP throwing his weight around. A break glass request is a serious event. Using it for anything other than a total system outage is a fireable offense. Grant had risked his entire career to get into that laptop. "Why?" I asked aloud. "Why take that risk just to see a project timeline?" "Maybe he's not looking for the timeline," Marcus said. "Maybe he is looking for what isn't there." Marcus tapped a few keys. I did some digging after I saw the alarm. I looked for patterns. I found a similar event log from 18 months ago. A project folder was mass deleted using an emergency admin override. The case was flagged as accidental data loss and closed within 24 hours. "Who was the admin?" I asked. "A director named Elias Thorne," Marcus said. "He left the company 2 weeks after the incident. Personal reasons," the email said. The name struck a chord. I pulled out my phone and opened a professional networking app. I searched for Elias Thorne. There he was. Elias Thorne, currently a senior vice president at a logistics firm in Chicago. But I scrolled down to his employment history. Before Redhaven, he had been a director at Omnicorp Consulting. I opened a new tab and searched for Grant Halbrook. There it was. Grant had spent 5 years at Omnicorp Consulting as a regional VP. They had worked together. The realization hit me like a splash of ice water. This was a cleanup crew. Elias Thorne had likely buried something 18 months ago, perhaps a botched implementation or a financial discrepancy, and then left. Now that the Sterling project was under scrutiny, Grant had been brought in to ensure the bodies stayed buried. My Delta folder, with its raw data comparisons, threatened to expose whatever timeline manipulation or data fudging had started back then. "They are friends," I whispered. "Or at least, accomplices." "I cannot keep this log open," Marcus said, closing his laptop. "If they audit my view history, I am done. But Hazel, you need to know that this is not just an office squabble. This is an active cover-up." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. "You were never here." I took the elevator back up, but I did not go to my desk. I went straight to the Security Operations Center on the 30th floor. Miller was waiting for me. He was a large man with the demeanor of a retired linebacker. He was sitting in a glass-walled office, staring at a bank of monitors. "Sit," Miller said. I sat. On his desk was a single sheet of paper. "We saw the attempt last night," Miller said. "The break-glass request." "I know," I said. Miller looked at me sharply. "You have good ears. That information is classified." "I have good instincts," I countered. "What happens now?" "Now," Miller said, sliding the paper toward me. "We formalize this. This is an affidavit of truth. It states that you are voluntarily submitting your device and all related correspondence as evidence in an internal investigation regarding potential executive misconduct and data tampering. Once you sign this, you become a protected witness under the corporate whistleblower policy, but it also means you cannot back down. If you are wrong, or if this is a personal vendetta, you will be terminated for filing a false report." I looked at the paper. It was heavy, formal, and terrifying. It was the point of no return. "I am not wrong," I said. I picked up the pen. I signed my name. Hazel Mercer, in clear, steady cursive. I dated it. "Done," I said. Miller took the paper and slid it into a folder. "Go back to your desk. Do your work. Do not engage with Mr. Halbrook unless there is a witness present." When I returned to the 42nd floor, the atmosphere had shifted again. It was hostile. I walked to the break room to get water, and 2 account managers stopped talking the moment I entered. They did not look at me. They looked through me. "I heard she locked the laptop because she deleted the master file by accident," one of them whispered as I turned my back. "That is what Grant said," the other replied, not bothering to lower her voice. "He said she is trying to ransom the machine to negotiate a severance package because she knows she screwed up the timeline." I gripped my water bottle. Grant was smart. He knew he could not fire me while the investigation was pending, so he was destroying my reputation. He was painting me as the incompetent, hysterical employee who was holding the company hostage to cover her own mistakes. It was a classic projection. He was accusing me of exactly what he was doing. I walked back to my desk. My head held high. I refused to defend myself against rumors. The truth was in the logs. At 4 o'clock, the bomb dropped. It came in the form of an email from the chief legal officer, addressed to the entire executive team, but copied to me and Miller. Subject notice of external audit. Sterling Logistics. I opened it. Due to conflicting reports regarding the integrity of the project data and the recent chain of custody escalation, Sterling Logistics has exercised Clause 9 of their contract. They have engaged a third-party forensic accounting firm to conduct a full audit of all project data, timelines, and communications, effective immediately. All internal data is now frozen. Any attempt to modify, delete, or access project files without the express permission of the auditors will be considered a breach of contract. I leaned back in my chair. Grant's plan had backfired. By trying to force his way in, he had spooked the client. Now, it wasn't just me he had to worry about. It wasn't just SecOps. It was an army of external auditors who did not care about his title or his smile. I looked across the office toward the glass-walled office of the vice president. Grant was standing there, reading the same email on his phone. He looked up. Our eyes met across 50 feet of gray carpet. For the first time since he walked into the company, Grant Halbrook looked terrified. He had tried to bench me. Instead, he had just invited the referees onto the field, and they were bringing the red cards. The silence that followed Grant's removal was short-lived. He had been escorted out of the boardroom, but he had not left the building. He had one final move to make, a scorched earth tactic designed to freeze the entire investigation and cast doubt on my credibility. 10 minutes after the door closed behind him, Evelyn Agnew's phone buzzed on the boardroom table. She looked at the screen, and her eyebrows knitted together in a severe line. "It is a formal whistleblower complaint," Evelyn said, looking up at the CEO. "Filed by Grant Halbrook just now. He claims he has credible evidence that Hazel Mercer has been exfiltrating proprietary intellectual property to a personal server for the last 3 months. He states that her refusal to hand over the laptop was a delay tactic to allow a background deletion script to run." Julian Vance looked at me. "Hazel." I did not flinch. This was the desperation of a drowning man. He was projecting his own guilt onto me. "I have never moved a single file off the secure network," I said calmly. "My transfer logs will prove that." "He is demanding an immediate forensic sweep of your user profile." Evelyn said, If we do not do it, he will claim we are covering up for a rogue employee to protect the client contract. Do it, I said. Run the sweep, right now. Director Kovic typed a command into his terminal. The room watched the progress bar on the main screen. It was a digital autopsy of my work life. Every file I had touched, every email I had sent, every USB drive I had ever inserted. Scanning for mass data egress, Kovic announced. Looking for large zip files, encrypted archives, or unauthorized cloud uploads. The bar hit 100%. Negative, Kovic said. User Mercer has 0 instances of external data transfer, no USB mounting events in the last 6 months, no uploads to Dropbox, Google Drive, or personal FTP sites. Her outbound traffic is cleaner than mine. I looked at Evelyn. He lied. Again. Wait, Kovic said. He was squinting at the secondary log stream. I am seeing a massive data egress attempt, though it was flagged by the data loss prevention system yesterday at 5:58 in the evening. From where? Julian asked. The source IP maps to the hardline in the vice president's corner office. Kovic said, someone tried to upload 4 gigabytes of project data to a private server hosted in the Cayman Islands. The firewall killed the connection because the destination was on the blacklisted IP range. The room turned to ice. Grant had accused me of stealing data to distract from the fact that he had tried to smuggle the entire project repository out of the building the night before. Grant claimed he was in a strategy meeting at that time, Evelyn noted, checking her notes. He was in his office, I said. I saw him. He slammed the door right after I copied legal on the client email. Grant had tried to steal the data so he could take it to a competitor or use it as leverage. When the firewall stopped him, he tried to physically take my laptop to destroy the evidence of the discrepancy. Suddenly, the intercom on the table buzzed. It was Sarah, the executive assistant. Mr. Vance, Grant is in the outer lobby, she said. He is shouting that the operations team is compromised. He is blaming the director. Let him in, Julian said. Let him dig his hole. Grant stormed back in, followed by a nervous-looking security guard. He pointed a finger directly at Marissa Klein. This is her fault, Grant yelled, pivoting from me to my boss. Marissa runs a loose ship. She lets analysts create hidden folders. She lets them manage their own security protocols. If data was mishandled, it is because operational oversight is non-existent. I was trying to fix her mess. Marissa stood up. For 5 years, I had watched Marissa swallow her pride, defer to loud men, and apologize for things she did not do just to keep the peace. I expected her to fold. I expected her to take the blame to save her pension. No, Marissa said. Her voice was shaking, but it was loud. I do not run a loose ship, Grant. I run a compliant one. The only reason Hazel had to create a hidden folder was because you ordered the team to ignore the discrepancies in the timeline. You told us to make it green for the dashboard. I did no such thing, Grant spat. You did, Marissa said. Reaching into her pocket, she pulled out her phone. And unlike you, I do not send reckless emails, but I do keep voicemails. Do you want me to play the message from last Friday where you told me to massage the dates before the Sterling call? Grant froze. He looked at the phone in her hand like it was a loaded gun. You are all conspiring against me, Grant hissed. This is a mutiny. It is a documentation of facts, I said. Before Grant could respond, the large screen on the wall flashed with a priority notification. It was an incoming email from the General Counsel of Sterling Logistics. Evelyn opened it. Her face went pale. They are pausing the contract, Evelyn read. Quote, until Redhaven can provide a forensic guarantee that no unauthorized party has accessed our employee data, we are suspending all signature authority. We cannot entrust our supply chain to a partner with executive-level security breaches. End quote. The silence in the room was absolute. Grant had not just caused a scene, he had stopped the revenue. The $100 million deal was dead in the water because of his ego. Grant stared at the screen. They cannot do that. I have a relationship with Sterling. You have no relationship, Julian said. You have a liability. My own laptop, the backup one I had brought with me, chimed softly. I glanced down. It was a personal email to my work address from Mr. Sterling, Hazel. The email read, my security team briefed me on the chain of custody protocols you initiated. It is rare to see that level of integrity. If Redhaven wants to keep this business, I need to know you are the one holding the keys to the data. We need people who follow the rules, not people who rewrite them. I did not read it aloud. I did not have to. The shift in power was palpable. Director Kovic, Julian said, mount the evidence drive, the one Hazel sealed. We need to see what is in the Delta folder. If the client is pausing the deal, we need to know exactly what Grant was trying to hide. Wait, Grant stepped forward. You cannot open that without my consent. It contains my personal management notes. It is privileged. It is on a company device, created by a company analyst, containing company data. Evelyn said, You have no privilege here. Kovic typed in the master decryption key. The screen mirrored the contents of the sealed laptop. He navigated to the local directory. There it was. Delta Review. He opened the main spreadsheet. It was a side-by-side comparison. Column A was titled Actual Engineering Timeline. Column B was titled Sales Timeline, Grant H. The discrepancies were not minor. They were catastrophic. Look at the dates, I said, pointing to the screen. The engineering reality says the logistics module will be ready in November. Grant sold it for a June launch. That is a 5-month gap. And here, Kovic said, scrolling down, the data migration risk is flagged as critical in the system, but in the report Grant prepared for the board, he manually changed it to low. This is not a mistake, Julian whispered. This is fraud. He was selling a product that does not exist yet to trigger his signing bonus, and he was planning to blame the delay on the operations team later. Grant was backing away toward the door. The color had drained from his face completely. He realized that the chain of custody form I had forced onto the table wasn't just about a laptop. It was the padlock that kept him from deleting this file. If I had given him the computer, this spreadsheet would have vanished, and in 6 months, when the project failed, he would have fired Marissa and me for incompetence. I can explain, Grant stammered. It was an aggressive target. That is what you hired me for. To push the team. You were not pushing the team, Julian said. You were cooking the books. Evelyn Agnew closed her folder. She took off her glasses. Grant Halbrook, she said, her voice sounding like a judge passing a sentence. Please sit down. The internal review is no longer a review. It is a formal investigation into corporate malfeasance and contract fraud. We are going to need a recorded statement from you regarding these files, and I strongly suggest you do not try to leave the room again. Grant looked at the door, then at the table, and finally at me. He saw the notebook in front of me, the one where I had written down every time, every lie, and every threat. He slumped into the chair. He looked small. The expensive suit suddenly seemed too big for him. You ruined everything, he whispered at me. No, Grant, I said. I just wrote it down. The red light on the digital recorder was the only bright thing in the small deposition room. It was Friday morning, 24 hours after the boardroom confrontation, and the atmosphere in the company had shifted from chaotic panic to a heavy, waiting silence. I sat across from Evelyn Agnew and an external counsel hired by the board to conduct the formal inquiry. Please state your name for the record, the external lawyer said. He was a gray-haired man who looked like he had spent 50 years unraveling corporate disasters. Hazel Mercer. I said, Ms. Mercer, please describe the events of Tuesday morning using only factual observations. Omit opinions on Mr. Halbrook's character. I took a sip of water. I did not need my notes anymore. The events were burned into my memory. At 10:42 in the morning, Vice President Grant Halbrook approached my station in Conference Room B. I began. My voice was steady. He extended his hand and verbally requested the surrender of my assigned laptop, asset tag 4492. I asked if he had a support ticket. He replied that he did not. I offered to forward specific files. He refused and repeated the demand for the physical hardware. At that point, I produced the chain of custody form. He refused to sign it. I spoke for 40 minutes. I detailed the hallway conversation, the retaliatory removal of my calendar access, the attempt to bypass the break glass protocol, and the final accusation of data theft he had levied against me. I did not say he was arrogant. I did not say he was a liar. I simply said, he stated X. The logs show Y. When I finished, the external lawyer clicked off the recorder. He looked at Evelyn. It is airtight, he said. She followed the handbook to the letter. If you fire her, she will own this building. Evelyn nodded. She looked tired. Thank you. Hazel, you can go back to your desk. Walking back to the operations floor felt different this time. 2 days ago, I had been a pariah. I had been the radioactive employee that no one wanted to touch. Now, as I walked down the aisle, heads turned, but not in fear. They looked at me with a mix of curiosity and reluctant respect. I sat down and unlocked my workstation. My access had been fully restored. My calendar was populated again. My phone buzzed. It was a text message from one of the junior analysts who had ignored me in the break room yesterday. "Hey Hazel, just heard the rumors about the audit. Sounds like you saved us from a mess. Sorry I didn't say hi yesterday." I looked at the screen. It would have been easy to be bitter. It would have been easy to reply with a sarcastic comment about fair-weather friends, but I knew that would not help. They were just people trying to survive a predator. I typed back, "Thanks. Just make sure you document your own work from now on. Do your part." I put the phone away. I did not want to be a hero. I just wanted to do my job. A shadow fell across my desk. I looked up to see Marissa Klein. She looked like she had aged 5 years in 2 days. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she was holding a cup of coffee with both hands as if for warmth. "Can we talk?" she asked. "We can?" I said. She pulled up a chair. The same chair Grant had sat in when he first introduced himself to the team. "I am sorry." "Hazel," Marissa said. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I told you to let it go. I told you to apologize to him. If you had listened to me—" She trailed off. We both knew what would have happened. If I had listened to her, the fraud would have continued. The client would have sued us, and when the dust settled, Grant would have blamed Marissa and me, and we would have been the ones facing legal action while he moved on to his next victim. "You were scared." "Marissa," I said, "he is a vice president. You have a family. That is not an excuse," she said, shaking her head. "I am the director. It was my job to protect the team. Instead, I let you stand in front of the bus alone. I thought I was keeping the peace. I was just enabling a bully." I looked at her. I appreciated the apology, but I needed her to understand that this could not happen again. "I do not hold a grudge," I said, "but next time, Marissa, when someone on your team is doing the right thing, do not tell them to be quiet. Protect the person who is following the rules, not the person who is breaking them." Marissa nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I will. I promise." The day wore on, heavy and slow. The office felt like a ship that had just hit an iceberg and was waiting to see if it would sink. Grant was nowhere to be seen. His office blinds were drawn. When I checked the global address list, his calendar was completely grayed out. The status simply read, "Unavailable." But silence in a corporate investigation is rarely peaceful. It usually means the lawyers are weaponizing the paperwork. At 3 o'clock, Dana Holt from HR appeared at my desk. She did not look angry anymore. She looked grim. "Hazel, Evelyn needs you in the war room," Dana said. "Bring your laptop." We walked to the executive suite in silence. Inside the war room, the mood was funereal. Julian, the CEO, was pacing by the window. Evelyn was reviewing a document on the screen. "We found something," Evelyn said as I sat down. "After your testimony regarding the pattern of behavior, we reached out to a contact at Omnicorp, informal channels." She slid a folder across the table. "Grant did not just know Elias Thorne," Evelyn said. "There were 2 formal complaints filed against Grant Halbrook at his previous firm. Both were from female subordinates. Both involved aggressive demands for data access outside of protocol and intimidation tactics. They were settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements." I felt a chill run down my spine. "He does this everywhere," I said. "He intimidates the staff into handing over the keys, manipulates the data to hit his bonus targets, and then leaves before the audit happens." "Exactly," Julian said, turning from the window. "But this time, he got caught because he ran into the one person who cared more about the process than the hierarchy. The problem is, Sterling Logistics does not care about our internal justice. They care about their data." Julian pointed to the screen. An email from Mr. Sterling was open. To Julian Vance, CEO, from Sterling Logistics. Subject, final determination. "We are not interested in your internal personnel issues. We have lost confidence in Red Haven's control environment. Unless you can provide a concrete, verifiable plan to guarantee data integrity within 12 hours, we are triggering the termination clause and moving to a competitor." The room was silent. This was it. The death knell of the company's biggest contract. "We are going to lose them," Dana whispered. "We cannot rebuild trust in 12 hours. "Yes, we can," I said. The 3 executives looked at me. "How?" Julian asked. "We stop trying to hide the bruise," I said. "We show them the cure." I opened my notebook. I had been sketching out a plan since the audit was announced. "First," I said, "we agree to a permanent, rolling third-party audit of the project data, paid for by us. We give their auditors read-only access to our live environment. Total transparency." Julian nodded slowly. "Expensive, but necessary." "Second," I continued. We remove the position of vice president from the chain of data custody entirely. We rewrite the policy so that only the operations director and the senior lead may have right access to the master timeline. We make the data structure flat, so no executive can override it without a literal board vote. And third, Evelyn asked. Third, I said, we invite Mr. Sterling to a meeting tomorrow morning, and we do not just tell him Grant is gone. We tell him exactly how we caught him. We show him the chain of custody logs. We show him that our system works because our people work. We prove that while one executive was corrupt, the institution is immune because the staff are empowered to say no. Julian looked at me for a long moment. A slow smile spread across his face. You want to use the investigation as a sales pitch, he said. It is the only asset we have left, I replied. Integrity. Julian slapped the table. Set it up. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. The decision meeting. Evelyn began typing furiously. Dana was already on the phone with the external auditors. I walked back to my desk to prepare the presentation. I felt a sense of calm. We had a plan. We had the truth. But as I opened my email to check the meeting invite Julian had just sent out, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The calendar invite for Sterling remediation strategy. Final decision had been sent to the executive team, legal, and me. And there, in the list of attendees, was a name that should not have been there. A name that had accepted the invite 3 seconds after it was sent. Grant Halbrook. Accepted. I clicked on his status. His calendar was no longer gray. It was active. He was supposed to be benched. He was supposed to be locked out. But somehow, he had gotten the invite, and he was planning to come. I grabbed my phone and texted Miller in security. Grant just accepted the client meeting invite. Is his badge still active? 3 dots appeared. Then the reply. His badge was deactivated, but he still has building access as a guest if someone signs him in. And Hazel. He just logged into the guest Wi-Fi in the lobby. He was here. Grant Halbrook was not going to go quietly into the night. He was coming to the meeting. He was going to try to blow up the deal, blame the team, or burn the house down with all of us inside. It was a desperate, final gamble. I looked at the darkened windows of the 42nd floor. The storm I had felt brewing all week had finally arrived, and tomorrow morning, in front of our biggest client, it was going to break. The boardroom was silent as the clock ticked toward 9 in the morning. This was the endgame. On one side of the massive oak table sat Mr. Sterling and his team of external auditors, their faces unreadable. On our side sat Julian Vance, our CEO, flanked by Evelyn Agnew from legal and Director Kovic from security. I sat next to Marissa, my hands folded on top of the notebook that contained the history of the last 4 days. The empty chair at the end of the table loomed large. It was the seat reserved for the executive sponsor of the project. At 8:59, the double doors swung open. Grant Halbrook walked in. He was wearing a fresh suit, his hair perfectly styled, but his eyes were frantic. He had bypassed the deactivated badge readers, likely tailgating an intern through the lobby turnstiles, and charmed his way past the reception desk. He carried the energy of a man who believed he could talk his way out of a firing squad. Julian looked up. He did not look surprised. He looked disappointed. Grant, Julian said, his voice calm. You were placed on administrative leave. You are not cleared for this meeting. I am the Vice President of Operations, Grant declared, walking toward the empty chair. This is my project. This is my client. I have a right to be here to defend the company interests. He reached for the chair. Stop, Julian said. It was not a shout. It was a command. Grant froze, his hand hovering over the leather backrest. You are not the sponsor of this project anymore, Julian continued. If you wish to remain in this room, you will not sit at the table. You may sit in the gallery chairs against the wall. You are here as an observer only. Grant looked at the table, then at the client, and finally at the chairs lined up against the back wall, the seats usually reserved for junior note-takers and assistants. His face flushed a deep, blotchy red. He had walked in to command the room, and within 10 seconds, he had been demoted to the audience. Fine, Grant said through gritted teeth. He walked to the back of the room and sat down, crossing his arms defensively. Mr. Sterling did not even look at him. He turned his gaze to Julian. Let us begin, Sterling said. We are not here to discuss timelines or budgets today. We are here to discuss trust. My security team tells me there was an attempt to bypass the legal hold on our data. I want to know who did it, and I want to know why. Julian nodded to Evelyn. Evelyn Agnew stood up. She did not use a PowerPoint presentation. She used paper, She placed a single document on the table in front of Mr. Sterling. This is the chain of custody log initiated by Hazel Mercer on Tuesday morning. Evelyn said, "It documents a refusal by executive leadership to follow data transfer protocols." She placed a second document down. "And this is the security log from Wednesday evening. It shows a break-glass administrative request to access the disk image of the device in question." Mr. Sterling looked at the papers. "Who is the user associated with the request?" Evelyn pointed to the line on the page. "The user ID is Grant Halbrook." Sterling turned in his chair. He looked all the way to the back of the room, fixing Grant with a stare that could peel paint. "So," Sterling said, "it was not a hacker. It was not a system glitch. It was you." Grant stood up. He could not help himself. "I was conducting a vulnerability assessment," Grant shouted from the back. "I was testing the system to make sure your data was safe. Hazel Mercer is the one who locked the device. She is the one who obstructed the audit. I was trying to do my job." Director Kovic spoke up then. His voice was deep and filled the room like thunder. "That is factually incorrect," Kovic said. Kovic pressed a button on the console in front of him. The main screen lit up with a timeline. "Mr. Halbrook claims he was testing the system," Kovic explained. "However, the logs show that the break-glass attempt occurred at 6:45 in the evening. That is 3 hours after Mr. Halbrook signed the updated confidentiality agreement with your legal team, Mr. Sterling. And it is 2 hours after security operations explicitly warned him via email that the device was under legal seal." Kovic paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle. This was not a test. Kovic concluded, "A test is scheduled. A test is authorized. This was a targeted attempt to access specific files after being told to stop. This was a breach of intent." The room went deadly quiet. Grant had no defense for the timeline. He had signed the paper promising to protect the data, and then he had immediately tried to break in. Grant looked around the room, desperate for an ally. His eyes landed on me. "This is a setup," Grant hissed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She planned this. She created those hidden folders to entrap me. She has been plotting to take my job since I walked in the door. She is a rogue employee who hates authority." Sterling looked at me. I sat straight, my hands still folded on my notebook. I did not speak. I did not have to. Julian Vance leaned forward. "No, Grant," Julian said. "Hazel is not a rogue employee. She is the only person in this department who actually did her job. When you demanded the laptop, she said no. When you tried to bypass security, she reported it. When the client asked for the truth, she followed the legal protocol." Julian looked at Mr. Sterling. "We hired Grant to drive efficiency," Julian admitted. "Instead, he drove risk. Hazel Mercer did what we should have done from the beginning. She complied. She prioritized your data over our internal hierarchy. That is not a plot. Grant, that is integrity." Mr. Sterling drummed his fingers on the table. He looked at the logs again, then he looked at Grant, who was standing against the wall, looking smaller and more pathetic by the second. Finally, Sterling looked at me. "Ms. Mercer," Sterling said, "if we continue with Redhaven, who controls the master timeline? Who controls the Delta folder? I control it." I said clearly. "The data will be validated by me, locked by Director Kovic, and read only for everyone else. No one moves a date or hides a risk without a digital signature that I verify." Sterling nodded. He closed the folder in front of him. "We will not terminate the contract," Sterling announced. The air in the room seemed to lighten instantly. Marissa let out a breath she had been holding for an hour, however. Sterling added, raising a finger. "We have conditions. The project proceeds only if Hazel Mercer is named the lead of data governance for this account. She will have veto power over any operational timeline changes. And secondly, the individual responsible for this breach must be removed from our account permanently." Julian stood up. He turned to face the back of the room. "Grant Halbrook," Julian said formally, "you are hereby relieved of all duties regarding the Sterling Logistics account. Your access to the building is revoked effective immediately pending the conclusion of the internal fraud investigation." Grant stepped forward, his face pale. "You cannot do this. I am the vice president. You cannot let a client dictate your org chart. I am not letting the client dictate it." Julian said, "I am dictating it. You cost us trust. You almost cost us $100 million. Please escort yourself out, or Director Kovic will do it for you." Grant looked at Kovic, who was already standing up. He looked at me. I met his gaze. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just watched him realize that the game was over. He had tried to play power politics, and he had lost to a checklist. Grant grabbed his portfolio. He turned and walked out the door. his footsteps echoing in the silence. He was gone. Julian turned back to the table. "Thank you. Mr. Sterling?" Julian said. "We will have the new governance structure on your desk by noon." Sterling stood up and reached across the table. He did not shake Julian's hand first. He shook mine. "Good work, Hazel," Sterling said. "It is rare to find someone who knows the difference between loyalty to a boss and loyalty to the truth." As the room cleared out, I stayed in my seat for a moment. Marissa put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. I looked at the empty chair where Grant had tried to sit. He had been benched, not by me, and not even really by the CEO. He had been benched by the chain of custody. He had fought the paperwork, and the paperwork won. I picked up my notebook and the chain of custody form that started it all. I walked out of the boardroom and back to my desk. I had a project to finish, and for the first time in a week, I knew the data was safe. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate justice. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while commuting, working, or relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing the rules win for once, please subscribe to the Boss Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by more people who need a little victory in their day.